Ambassador Kitlix settled into his recording chamber, his crystalline exoskeleton catching the soft bioluminescent light. After 30 cycles of service as the Harmonious Conjunction's senior xenopolitical analyst, this would be his final report. His antennae twitched as he activated the quantum recorder, a gesture of nervous anticipation he'd never quite overcome. Security Clearance Omega-79. Final observations on species designate human by Ambassador Kitlix of the Third Merge. He paused, mandibles clicking as he organized his thoughts. How does one explain a species that defies every predictive model? To my successor, I must begin with a confession. Everything we thought we knew about humans was wrong. Not in our facts. Those were accurate enough. They indeed evolved on a Class 12 death world, Earth, a planet that should have produced nothing but savage beasts. Our atmospheric analysis was correct. Their world's high oxygen content enables devastating forest fires. Our geological surveys confirmed their planet's unstable tectonics, their world literally trying to tear itself apart beneath their feet. Kitlix shifted, his crystalline joints creaking. But we made a critical error in our conclusions. We assumed that surviving such conditions would produce an aggressive, unstable species. Instead, it created something far more intriguing and far more dangerous. The recorder hummed softly as he brought up his personal observations. For 20 cycles, I've watched humans navigate our galactic society. They accept trade restrictions that cripple their economy. They endure spatial quarantines that limit their expansion. They smile politely through council sessions where lesser species mock their primitive origins. His antennae flattened against his carapace. Most consider this proof that humans have been successfully integrated into civilized space, that they've been tamed. He let out a clicking sound that, in his species, indicated dark amusement. I've spent enough time among them to know better. Kitlix brought up a hall recording from the previous council session. It showed the human ambassador, Sarah Chen, listening to the Vrex representative's lengthy speech about restricting human mining operations, supposedly for safety concerns, though everyone knew it was merely economic sabotage. Observe her carefully, he narrated. Note the slight tension in her jaw, the micro-expression that humans call a mirthless smile. Her hands are relaxed on the table, but her shoulders are set in a way that, in human body language, indicates combat readiness. She's not submitting to the Vrex's demands. She's choosing not to respond. The recording shifted to a trade negotiation. Here, watch Council Member Drake during the Jolaxian shipping tariff discussion. His smile never reaches his eyes. When the Jolaxian minister makes a particularly insulting suggestion, Drake's pupils dilate briefly, a survival trait from their predatory ancestry, yet he maintains perfect diplomatic composure. Kitlix switched off the holograms, his crystalline form reflecting the dim light. We say humans have adapted well to galactic civilization. The truth is more unsettling. They're adapting galactic civilization to them, slowly and with infinite patience. They're not playing by our rules because they have to. They're doing it because, for now, they choose to. He leaned closer to the recorder, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I've seen their training facilities, watched their military exercises. Everything they show us is carefully curated. But sometimes, when they think no one's watching, you catch glimpses of their true capabilities. The way they move in high gravity, their casual disregard for environmental hazards that would kill most species, their ability to continue functioning with injuries that should be incapacitating. They're not tamed, he concluded, his antennae quivering. They're waiting. And I fear what will happen when they finally stop waiting. This isn't a story of how civilization changed the humans. It's a story of how long humans will tolerate a civilization that refuses to change. With a final click of his mandibles, Kitlix added, May my successor have the wisdom to see what I saw too late. End report. The Vlaxian Energy Minister, Supreme Coordinator Zexli, watched the holographic display with unwavering compound eyes. The human colony ship Hope's Cradle appeared as a brilliant point of light against the void, its fusion drives pulsing steadily as it carried 2,000 settlers toward their new home in the Arcturus sector. "Initiate the sequence," she commanded, her wing casings rustling with anticipation. Decades of careful planning had led to this moment. The humans' methodical expansion had to be checked, their influence curtailed. What better way than to demonstrate the dangers of their reckless colonization efforts? Aboard the Hope's cradle, Environmental Systems Officer Maria Santos frowned at her displays. Something was wrong with the atmospheric processors. Subtle at first, a slight fluctuation in oxygen levels, a minor variance in temperature control. But the patterns weren't random. Bridge, environmental. "I'm seeing some anomalous readings in life support," she reported, fingers dancing across haptic interfaces. "Running diagnostics now." Captain Chen acknowledged the report with practiced calm, but his eyes narrowed. They'd detected Vlaxian ships at the edge of their sensor range earlier, supposedly conducting routine patrols. Another coincidence in a string of many. The ship's AI flagged a critical alert. Trace amounts of a complex organic compound were building up in the recycling systems. Maria's eyes widened as she recognized the molecular structure. "Sir, the processors are being forced to synthesize." Her warning cut off as the compound reached critical concentration. Throughout the ship, environmental systems began pumping out an odorless, colorless gas. The AI's warnings were silenced by carefully crafted malware that had waited months to activate. In the nursery section, 4-year-old Tommy Mitchell listened as his mother read him a bedtime story. The brave astronaut looked back at Earth one last time, she said softly, her voice growing drowsy, and knew that no matter how far he traveled. She never finished the sentence. The Vlaxian observation team recorded everything. Children in cryogenic pods who would never wake up. Parents who died holding their families close. The ship's crew slumped at their stations, having fought to the last moment to save their passengers. Hours later, in the Galactic Council's emergency session, the Vlaxian ambassador presented their findings with perfectly practiced concern. "A tragic accident," he declared. "The humans' experimental life support systems proved unstable, leading to catastrophic failure. We tried to render assistance, but sadly, our ships arrived too late." The council chamber hummed with quiet conversations and political calculations. Most species had learned to ignore the occasional accident that befell human operations. It was simply how the game was played. Only the Kithtul ambassador, with their species' heightened empathic senses, noticed the change in the room's emotional atmosphere when the human ambassador, Sarah Chen, stood to respond. Where humans usually radiated complex layers of emotion, there was now a void, a coldness that made the empath's tendrils curl in primitive fear. The chamber fell silent as Chen walked to the podium. The council members leaned forward, expecting the usual diplomatic response. Protests tempered by pragmatism, outrage contained by political necessity. Instead, she reached up with deliberate slowness and unpinned her diplomatic credentials. The metallic tap of the badge hitting the podium echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. Without a word, without a glance at her former colleagues, she turned and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps on the marble floor counted down to a future none of them were prepared for. The massive doors closed behind her with a sound like a sealed tomb. In the utter silence that followed, the Kithtul ambassador whispered a phrase from their species' ancient war songs. "Today we learned that peace is not the absence of violence, but its patient predator." Junior Communications Officer Trillax of the Galactic Trade Federation stared at his console in confusion. The human merchant vessel Rising Tide had appeared on schedule at the Centauri Gateway, but something was wrong. Instead of the usual cheerful banter and cargo manifestos, their response to his standard hailing sequence was a burst of encrypted data, cold and precise. "Supervisor," he called out, mandibles twitching. "I think there's something wrong with the human ship's comms." His supervisor, a veteran of 20 cycles, floated over on gravity nullifiers. She studied the response pattern, her bioluminescent patches dimming with concern. The code was perfectly formatted, containing exactly the minimum required information for passage. Nothing more. "Send them through," she ordered quietly. As the massive human vessel glided past their station, they noticed its external lighting was dark, its viewing ports opaque. Where human ships usually blaze like small suns against the void, this one moved like a shadow. It wasn't an isolated incident. On Omega Centauri Station, the largest entertainment hub in the sector, Vexra, the entertainment coordinator, watched in disbelief as human performers canceled their contracts en masse. The popular holodrama Soul Stories terminated mid-season without explanation. Human restaurants closed their doors. Tourist bookings evaporated. In the diplomatic quarter of New Genesis, the most prestigious human cultural center outside Earth, Ambassador Lyran found the massive building empty. No staff, no teachers, no students. Only a simple holographic message floated in the entrance. Temporarily closed for security concerns. Duration indefinite. The Galactic Council's Intelligence Division compiled reports with growing unease. Human ships were retrofitting at an unprecedented rate. Vessels that had appeared purely civilian now bristled with previously concealed weapon mounts. Cargo holds transformed into missile bays. Passenger compartments revealed themselves as fighter hangars. But it was the silence that truly terrified them. No demands were made. No threats issued. The humans simply withdrew. Trade agreements were suspended with perfect legal precision, citing obscure clauses about safety concerns. Human diplomats departed their posts with impeccable protocol, leaving everything in pristine order. In the Arcturus sector, a Drexy mining fleet attempted to capitalize on the situation, moving to claim an asteroid field previously worked by human companies. They found the automated defense systems still operational, and far more extensive than any previous scan had suggested. 3 ships were disabled with surgical precision before they could enter the exclusion zone. The message was clear. Human space was now closed. Admiral Kovacs of the Galactic Defense Force reviewed the latest intelligence with growing horror. New analysis of decades of sensor data revealed a chilling pattern. Every human ship that had visited their ports had been mapping their defenses. Every trade mission had been cataloging their vulnerabilities. Every cultural exchange had been studying their weaknesses. They'd been preparing for this, he realized, his scales paling. Not for war. They'd been preparing to survive our response when they finally stopped playing along. In her private chambers on Capital World, Council Elder Enxterra watched the latest footage from the human borders. A Vlaxian scout group had probed their defenses, expecting to find chaos in the wake of the diplomatic withdrawal. Instead, they encountered human warships moving with terrifying coordination. The vessels were eerily silent on all frequencies, their movements precise and practiced. When the Vlaxians retreated, the humans didn't pursue. They simply resumed their patrol pattern, like predators confident their prey would return. "We never tamed them," Enxterra whispered to her empty chamber. "We just never gave them a reason to show us what tamed creatures do when the cage door opens." The true meaning of her words would become apparent all too soon. Fleet Commander Valaxi of the Vlaxian Expeditionary Force felt confident as his ships surrounded Henderson's Rest, a small human trading outpost in the Outer Rim. The station was minimal, barely 2 kilometers in diameter, with a crew of perhaps 50 humans. An easy target to demonstrate that the humans' withdrawal wasn't consequence-free. "Their shields are pathetic," his tactical officer reported with a chittering laugh. "Barely enough to stop meteoroids. No significant weapons detected. They're completely exposed." Valaxi's mandibles formed the Vlaxian equivalent of a smirk. "Send the demand for surrender. Let's show the galaxy how these Deathworlders respond to real pressure." The human response came immediately. A simple text transmission. "Leave." Valaxi ordered his gunners to disable the station's primary antenna array, a warning shot to demonstrate their superiority. The plasma bolt struck true, melting the communication dish into slag. That's when everything changed. The station's meteoroid shields suddenly pulsed with energy patterns no Vlaxian scientist had ever seen. Sections of hull plating rotated, revealing weapon systems that had been perfectly masked from sensors. But what terrified Valexi's crew wasn't the station's defenses, it was the humans themselves. Station security footage, broadcast on all frequencies, showed the human defenders moving with terrifying efficiency. In the hydroponics section, where the artificial gravity had been damaged and set to triple normal levels, humans ran and fought as if nothing was wrong. A maintenance technician, her arm clearly broken, calmly splinted it with spare parts and returned to manning a defense station. Impossible, Valexi's medical officer whispered. Their bones should be shattered under that gravity, their muscles torn, their organs crushed. In the outer hull, a breach forced an emergency lockdown. Cameras showed 3 human defenders caught outside the sealed compartments. Instead of dying in the vacuum, they calmly activated emergency protocols that had never appeared in any intelligence report. Their skin darkened with some kind of reactive pigmentation, their eyes protected by a nictitating membrane that no one knew humans possessed. They moved through the void like it was their natural environment, using handheld maneuvering units to flank the Vlaxian boarding pods. Every shot was precise, calculated. Humanity's stone-throwing heritage adapted to zero combat. By the first egg, Valexi's tactical officer breathed. They're not even using combat stims. This is how they fight normally. The station's defenders coordinated with devastating efficiency. No wasted movement, no battle cries, no displays of emotion. Just the methodical precision of apex predators who had spent generations perfecting the art of warfare. Valexi watched in horror as his boarding parties were systematically neutralized. The humans didn't just defeat them. They did it with such calculated efficiency that it was clear they were holding back, treating the battle more like a training exercise than a desperate defense. When the station's counterattack began, it demonstrated a mastery of space combat that made previous human military displays look like children's games. Hidden missile batteries emerged from asteroid fields that had been seeded years in advance. Targeting systems anticipated Vlaxian evasive patterns with uncanny accuracy, as if they'd spent decades studying exactly how their ships would move. As his fleet fell into disarray, Valexi received one final transmission from Henderson's Rest. The video showed the human defenders calmly tending their wounds, repairing damage, and restoring systems. Their commander, a gray-haired woman who looked more like a school teacher than a warrior, spoke directly to the camera. "We're still being civil. Don't make us stop." Valexi ordered an immediate retreat, but he knew it was too late. The galaxy would see this footage. They would finally understand what humanity had been hiding beneath their diplomatic smiles. The Deathworlders had finally shown their teeth. Grand Admiral Zexna of the Vlaxian Defense Force stood before the holographic display of their most secure military installation, Deep Fortress 7. Built into an airless moon, shielded by experimental quantum fields, protected by the most advanced AI in known space, it was considered impregnable. It had just gone dark. How? She demanded, her wing casings vibrating with fury. How did they penetrate our defenses? Her intelligence chief, still processing incoming data, could only wave his sensory stalks in confusion. They didn't penetrate them. Admiral, they were already inside. Had been for years. The records told an impossible story. Human maintenance contractors, hired decades ago through shell companies. Routine equipment upgrades that contained dormant subsystems. Even the quantum shields themselves had been partially manufactured in human-owned facilities, their code containing subtle backdoors that had waited years to be activated. Across Vlaxian space, their mighty defense grid was failing, not through overwhelming force, but through meticulous planning that had begun before some of their officers were even hatched. On the bridge of the HSS Leviathan, Fleet Captain Sarah Chen, the same woman who had once served as Earth's ambassador, watched the tactical display with predatory calm. Human warships emerged from hidden shipyards constructed in dimensional gaps, designs perfected through decades of careful preparation. "Target their remaining command nodes," she ordered. "Precision strikes only. No civilian casualties. Her weapons officer, a former cultural exchange teacher, inputted targeting solutions with the same careful attention he had once used to explain Earth poetry. The Leviathan's main gun, disguised for years as an atmospheric processing array, aligned with its target. The shot traveled across 3 light minutes of space and struck a Vlaxian command bunker with millimeter accuracy. The same calculations that had once helped humanity's ancestors bring down running prey with thrown stones, refined by centuries of technological advancement. In the Galactic Council's military observation chamber, representatives from a dozen species watched in stunned silence. The humans weren't just winning. They were rewriting everything known about warfare. "Look at their ship movements," a Tyranny tactical expert noted, his feathers bristling. "Those aren't standard military formations. They're hunting patterns. Pack hunting patterns." Human vessels moved in coordinated groups, using maneuvers that seemed chaotic until observers realized they were watching the spaceborne equivalent of how wolves isolated prey from a herd. Each fleet supported the others, cutting off escape routes, forcing their opponents into carefully prepared kill zones. But it was their ground forces that truly demonstrated why Earth was classified as a death world. Human Marines breached stations through service tunnels barely large enough for maintenance drones, their bodies adapting to conditions that should have been lethal. They functioned in toxic atmospheres, extreme temperatures, and radiation levels that would kill most species. "They're not using power armor," a Drexy observer realized with horror. "Those are just environmental suits. Everything else, the strength, the speed, the endurance, that's just how they are." The Vlaxians' most elite special operations team found themselves trapped in their own fortress, hunted through darkened corridors by humans who moved like living shadows. Their thermal imaging was useless. The humans had some kind of bioengineered skin coating that masked their heat signatures. "You don't understand," their commander transmitted before the signal went dark. "They're not using technology to enhance their combat abilities. They're using technology to restrain them, to make their fighting more precise, more controlled. What you're seeing now, this is them finally taking the limiters off." In orbit around Earth, the final pieces moved into place. Civilian vessels revealed themselves as carriers. Space stations transformed into fortress platforms. A network of defenses that had been hidden in plain sight for generations stood ready. Humanity hadn't militarized in response to the crisis. They had merely unveiled what was always there, waiting behind their diplomatic smiles. The Vlaxian High Command Bunker, buried 20 kilometers beneath the surface of their throne world, was considered the most secure location in their empire. Its location was protected by quantum-encrypted data, its very existence known only to the highest levels of their government, which made it all the more terrifying when every screen in the facility suddenly activated, displaying the face of the former human ambassador Sarah Chen. "Greetings, Eternal Commander Rexel," she said pleasantly, as if she were still in the diplomatic course. "I believe it's time we had an honest conversation about consequences." The Eternal Commander, supreme leader of the Vlaxian Consortium, felt his exoskeleton grow cold as he realized the implications. The humans hadn't just breached their security. They'd owned it for years. "Your private accounts on New Geneva have just been decrypted," Chen continued, still smiling that terrible diplomatic smile. "The ones containing the wealth extracted from your own people. In about 3 minutes, every Vlaxian citizen will receive a detailed accounting of exactly how much was stolen from them." Across Vlaxian space, the carefully maintained web of corruption and control began to unravel. Security systems that had protected the elite for generations suddenly failed, their backdoors exploited with surgical precision. But the humans didn't use this access for destruction. They used it for revelation. "We could have done this at any time," Chen explained, her voice carrying the patience of a teacher explaining the simple concept. "We knew about the Hope's Cradle sabotage plan 6 months before you executed it. We knew about every shell company, every secret account, every hidden facility. On 1,000 worlds, Vlaxian citizens watched in stunned silence as decades of classified data scrolled across their screens. Not military secrets. Those remained secure. Instead, they saw the systematic theft of their society's wealth, the careful manipulation of their media, the calculated oppression of their own people. We waited, Chen continued, because we wanted to see if your government would choose to be better. If you would recognize that civilization isn't about pretending to be peaceful, it's about choosing to be just. In orbit around the Vlaxian core worlds, human warships maintained their positions with deadly precision. They didn't fire their weapons. They didn't need to. Their mere presence, their capability for violence, held carefully in check, was message enough. Here is what will happen next, Chen declared, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. Your military installations, the ones we've known about for decades, will receive precisely targeted strikes. No personnel will be harmed. But your ability to project power beyond your home systems will end. As if to demonstrate, key strategic facilities across Vlaxian space began to self-destruct. Not in devastating explosions, but in careful, controlled demolitions that reduced critical equipment to slag while leaving surrounding structures untouched. Your leadership, the ones responsible for 2,000 murders aboard the Hope's Cradle, will face justice. Not through violence, but through the very legal system you thought you controlled. We've already provided the evidence to your own prosecutors. The Eternal Commander watched as his private security forces were disabled by their own systems, their weapons refusing to fire, their communications filled with proof of their crimes. This is civilization, Chen concluded, her expression finally showing a hint of the predator behind the diplomat's mask. Not the absence of violence, but the choice to use it precisely, justly, and only when necessary. You thought we were weak because we chose peace. Now you understand. Peace was never our weakness. It was our preference. The screens went dark, leaving the Vlaxian leadership to contemplate a truth their species had forgotten. True power isn't in the ability to deal death, but in the wisdom to know when not to. The emergency session of the Galactic Council stretched into its third day. The chamber, once a place of casual dismissal toward human concerns, now held a palpable tension. The human delegation's chairs remained conspicuously empty, a silent reminder of recent events. The evidence is irrefutable, First Speaker Zenith announced, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns that indicated deep distress. The Vlaxian Consortium's involvement in the Hope's Cradle tragedy has been confirmed through 17 independent investigations. Holoprojectors displayed a damning cascade of data, carefully falsified safety reports, manufactured sensor readings, money trails leading to shell companies. The humans had possessed this evidence for months before the incident. They had given the Council every opportunity to discover the truth on their own. In the gallery, Ambassador Kitlix watched with his successor, his crystalline exoskeleton dulled with age. "Do you understand now?" he asked softly. Every trade agreement they signed, every diplomatic concession they made, these weren't acts of submission. They were tests. The council chambers echoed with debate as species after species rose to speak. The Drexy representative, whose people had long mocked humanity's primitive origins, now spoke of their admirable restraint. The Jolaxian minister, who had once proposed quarantining Earth as a savage world, praised humanity's precise application of justice. "They could have destroyed us," a Tyranny diplomat whispered to his aide. "Not just the Vlaxians, any of us. All those cultural exchange programs, those technical advisors we accepted so graciously. They were mapping our weaknesses the entire time." Through it all, the human seats remained empty. Their message was clear. They would return to the council, but only when it proved worthy of their presence. In the diplomatic quarter, the Human Cultural Center reopened, but now visitors noticed details they had overlooked before. The ancient military treatises displayed alongside art exhibitions, the historical documents showing humanity's long journey from prehistoric hunters to spacefaring civilization. They hadn't been hiding their nature. They had been displaying it openly, waiting for others to understand. They're not like us, a young Kithtal scholar observed, their empathic tendrils waving in fascination. When we achieved spaceflight, we had to learn violence. They had to learn peace, and they chose to learn it so well that we mistook their mastery for weakness. Reports flowed in from across the galaxy. Human ships resumed their trade routes, their weapons once again concealed but no longer forgotten. Human diplomats returned to their posts, their smiles now recognized for what they had always been, not submission, but choice. The Vlaxian Consortium's dissolution was handled with characteristic human precision. No species was punished for their leaders' crimes. Instead, a carefully structured transition preserved economic stability, while excising the corruption that had festered for generations. The humans aren't occupying us, a Vlaxian reformist explained to the council. They're showing us how to be better than we were, not through force, but through example. In her private chambers, First Speaker Zenith composed the council's formal response to humanity's withdrawal. The words had been debated for days, each phrase weighted with new understanding. But in the end, they settled on a simple truth. We acknowledged that we mistook patience for weakness, restraint for submission, and the choice of peace for the absence of strength. We understand now that true civilization is not measured by how far we have come from violence, but by how wisely we choose to use or abstain from it. As she sealed the message, a report arrived. A human diplomatic vessel had been detected approaching the council station. Its weapons were powered down, its credentials in order. They were returning, not because they had to, but because they chose to. The age of underestimating humanity was over. Archives Section 7, Galactic Historical Institute, 300 years later. Young archivist Tilura's crystalline appendages trembled with excitement as she accessed the sealed records. As a fourth-generation scholar of human studies, she had read every public document about the Hope's Cradle incident. But today, on the tricentennial of those events, the final classified files would be opened. Her mentor, Archive Master Venix, watched with quiet amusement. His species had evolved from prey animals, yet he felt no instinctive fear as he observed the holographic recordings of humans in combat. Centuries of peaceful cooperation had changed many things. Watch carefully, he instructed as the first file began to play. This isn't just about what happened. It's about why we still study it. The recording showed Ambassador Kitlix's final report, the one that had warned of humanity's true nature. But it was the appended files that caught Tilura's attention. Personal logs from human diplomats, military officers, and civilians during those crucial days. They were afraid, she whispered, surprised. Not of fighting, but of having to fight. That's what no one understood back then, Venix confirmed. We thought their restraint came from weakness. Instead, it came from the wisdom of a species that knew exactly how good they were at violence, and chose something better. The archives revealed the full scope of human preparation. Contingency plans for every scenario. Defensive installations that could have crippled dozens of species. Intelligence networks that had mapped every potential threat. Yet in the end, they had used that power with surgical precision, choosing justice over vengeance. Computer, Tilura commanded, display current human military capabilities compared to 3 centuries ago. The holographic comparison made her step back. Humanity's power had grown exponentially, yet their commitment to peace had grown even stronger. They remained the galaxy's most capable warriors and its most dedicated diplomats. Did you know, Venix said softly, that the human diplomatic corps still uses the Hope's Cradle incident in their training? Not to study the military response, but to examine all the opportunities for peaceful resolution that were missed. They're still learning from it, still trying to do better. Tilura accessed the final file, a recent recording from the current human ambassador addressing a class of alien diplomatic students. The ambassador stood before a memorial to the Hope's Cradle's 2,000 lost souls, her voice carrying centuries of accumulated wisdom. We remembered not to fuel hatred, but to remind ourselves of the price of failure. the failure to understand, to communicate, to recognize that civilization isn't something we achieve, but something we must choose every day. In the Institute's garden, Tilara watched human and alien children playing together. A young Vlaxian, descendant of refugees from the old consortium, was teaching human children a traditional game. Nearby, a human instructor was showing alien students how to grow earth plants in alien soil. The humans have a saying, Venix observed. The true test of civilization is not how we treat our equals, but how we treat those in our power. 3 centuries ago, they proved they had the power to destroy their enemies. Instead, they chose to help them become better. Tilara completed her analysis, her final words flowing onto the screen. The Hope's Cradle incident remains the definitive moment in modern galactic history, not because of the violence that occurred, but because of the violence that didn't. It taught us that true strength lies not in the ability to take life, but in the choice to preserve it. The humans, born on a world that should have made them conquerors, became instead our teachers in the art of choosing peace. She sealed the archive, knowing future generations would continue to study this lesson. The Deathworlders had taught the galaxy that civilization wasn't about denying one's nature. It was about choosing, every day, to be better than one's nature demanded.